So now we're going to switch gears, flip to the next page here, and we're actually going to look at a couple different articles that I thought were helpful online that I came across, and the links are listed there, that kind of helped me understand systems, processes, gave a couple working definitions and differences. So what's a system? A system is a group or combination of things or parts forming a complex or unitary whole. In organizations, good systems have a clearly defined purpose that adds value. And they use the illustration of the mass transit system. So it's got a clear purpose to provide economical transportation, reduce pollution, and reducing the number of vehicles on the road. That's the purpose of public transportation. And so it's a combination. Well, it is a system, but it actually has a lot of subsystems. We'll talk about that. And it also has a bunch of these little moving parts that make it happen. And those are referred to as processes, all the related activities inside the system that make it function. So you got to buy tickets or bus credits or the whole app that you use to acquire, access to public transportation, equipment maintenance, vehicle and track repair, safety, etc. So they're the smaller parts of the larger system. And successful companies know this. They know you need to have healthy systems, and those systems are composed of efficient processes. And I like how it says that this article says the system is the what, and so it's the what you're doing, and then the process is the how you accomplish it. So that's one helpful way to look at it. And then the next page gives Lithium is a website that offers project planning and other things, and they had a great article that they defined process as a series of ordered activities that convert inputs into higher valued outputs. And the system is a group of interacting, interrelated, or interdependent elements organized to meet a particular set of business objectives. And at this point, my mind just starts to detach. Too many big words, what. So let's give a practical example. So instead of mass transit, they said, well, in business, and some of you guys who are in business, you know this. You've got marketing and sales and operations and order fulfillment, HR, training, accounting, payroll, collections, service delivery. Each of those is its own complex set of interacting, interrelated, interdependent elements. And those systems work together to create a healthy business. So then they said, well, let's pick one of them. Let's pick the first, marketing. You don't do marketing. Marketing is a collection of the people, systems, processes, and platforms that make up a marketing system for your business. So you might have subsystems like lead generation, your newsletter, social media, direct mail, podcast. And each one of those then will have processes, how-tos, steps in a flow. And they talk about 3 types of processes: management processes, operational processes, and supporting process. It's less important to me that you know and distinguish what the different types are, but flip to the next page with the drawing, or go to the next page, page 16. And this is where it really made sense for me. There you see business in red, and it's got those primary systems we just talked about. Then take marketing, for instance, and it's got subsystems, one of which is lead generation, so generating leads. Well, that lead generation has people. You've got teams. You've got platforms. That's the different things that you used by the lead generation system. But then you've got the processes. So you've got weekly network outreach processes. And then it fleshes those out even more detailed. Here's an example, and they show it like a flow chart. And before we're done tonight, we're going to take those Post-it notes, and you're going to pick one process that you need to flesh out. And we're just going to use the Post-it notes like they've done here, and they will represent each step in the process. If you try and just write it out, sometimes you forget, oh, that really fits in there. You got to erase, scratch it, start over. So we'll use Post-it notes because you can just move the Post-it note. So that's where we're going tonight. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? A system is the complex collection of all the different parts. The process is the specific set of tasks or workflow that has sometimes contingencies. If this happens, then this happens. If this happens, then this happens. So that's helpful for me to kind of distinguish. One is the what, one is the how. Now if you want to turn or take a look, I'm going to actually hand it over to Doug at this point. Doug, talk to us a little bit. Because of your experience, we were talking about how you found in some of your work contexts the importance and the benefit of effectively using systems and processes.
Yeah, and I'm going to be a little bit careful here with this one because, as I mentioned earlier, I love the idea of leadership and the theories behind it, but I also really love systems and processes, which I feel like I need to be pushing my glasses up my nose when I say that because it's really nerdy. But so it would be dangerous to let me go into super detail. So instead, I'm just going to talk a little bit to the importance and how I've run across it. And I've worked in a lot of different settings, diverse settings with systems and processes. And one of the places I've gotten to work with them is in the area of the government. Within my military career, I've worked with a specific system. And I'm guessing some of you guys, knowing what you know about government and systems and processes and government, you're saying you're picking a government system as a good example. Most government systems mainly work by not working. And there's definitely truth to that, but I've gotten to be part of a big system that the government has been developing for the last really close to 100 years now, everything. And so they began to find that one of the results of that, I mean, there's goods to it. You get to have specialization, all these different, basically, subsystems is what those agencies are. And they're not able to work together as much because there's not an overarching system. They don't know how to talk to one another. Every agency in the government has a different way of talking, different lingo, different this, different that. And so all of a sudden, there's no central system. And you have all these different subsystems and processes, and they're doing their own thing, and they've lost cohesion. There's not a central purpose. There's not something going on there. And this really started to come out in the early 1900s, in the 30s, I believe, with some of the major fires that were going on, forest fires in California, because they had different fire departments, and there was just all sorts of chaos. Nobody could figure out what everybody else was doing. Nobody's processes were the same. Nobody knew what to do. Resources were being wasted, and that's serious when you're talking about forest fires. People are dying. And so they started to come up with, and I won't bore you with the whole entire history, but they started to come up with something that was eventually called the Incident Command System, or ICS, that the government now uses for agencies all across the government. Actually, now they're starting just to call it IS. They're simplifying it a bit, which is a rare good thing that they're doing with it. But as they began to develop this, they began to develop it more and more, and there was sort of a time period where it was sort of testing it, seeing how it would work, and that's part of the importance that I'm sure we're going to get into a little bit deeper as we continue, is kind of testing these systems, having a structure behind it. And one of the first times they really rolled it out on a federal level, because it started among states and things, was the first attack on the World Trade Centers in 1993. And they were able to study that. One of the things that's going to be really important is you look at when your system is placed under stress to see how good it is and to see where your points of improvement really are. And so they got to run a look at what happened with that first attempted bombing in 93. The next time there was a major test on that system was the attacks of September 11th. What's interesting about that, and where we start to learn something when we look at that, is it happened to be not only a similar situation, but the exact same location as their biggest previous case study with the system. And so while they realized there were still places they needed to improve, it looked like it did fairly well in the case of the 9/11 attacks, because all of their hypotheticals were run on literally that building. And they seem to think we're doing well. And then Hurricane Katrina happened in 2006. And all of a sudden, the system was put under stress it had never seen before in a way they hadn't planned for before. And the results were very, very serious. We're talking, in this case, once again, which is more extreme than most businesses, but we're talking about people's lives. And in point of fact, they were so caught up in their system and in trying to figure that out, and they hadn't tested it and worked it and kept it in line with the goals, that a situation arose in which, you guys probably remember the name Mike Brown, who was the head of FEMA at the time that runs ICS. There was also a Coast Guard admiral who was second in command of the Coast Guard at the time named Thad Allen. And when Hurricane Katrina hit, President Bush sat down with these two men. and it was within a day of the hurricane hitting. It was right in the first wave of all the chaos. And FEMA had said, we can't send any assets in because our system isn't fully set up. Our system isn't in place, so it's not safe for all of the people who are responding. What he was missing there was the whole point of the system was to go in to save people, to protect people, to go in as quickly as possible. And he was so caught up on the system that he told President Bush we have to wait at least 3 days before sending in assets because we have to get this in place for it to be effective. And Thad Allen got so angry with him, and I love this. This is sort of a leadership thing as well. He literally, after listening to this politely, looked at the president, ignored Mike Brown, stood up and said, "It's him or it's me," and walked out of the room. He said, "I'm sending my guys in." And there's a few morals from that, because 6 months later, Mike Brown was out of a job, and Thad Allen was Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard. But it was also an opportunity for them to see not only we can't let the system overcome the goal, also we have to test the system in different places in different ways, and we see how it works best when it's under stress. And that helps us to continue to move it forward. And if we don't have a strong system, we either end up like we were before this came about, which is nobody understands how anything's working, or there's these huge consequences of not tying it to the goal, not testing it in different places. And a lot of it is common sense. But I've gotten to work with this. I'm an ICS instructor in a number of places, and I've watched this system literally save lives. And you cannot operate without a good system in the way that you want to. If you guys look at page 17, there is a little graphic there that has good system, bad system on the vertical axis, and bad people, good people on the horizontal axis there. And so what I'd like for you guys to do, and leave a little bit of space because we're going to tell you the answers that we've kind of got in here as well, but in kind of the spaces in between, kind of like that graph we saw earlier, between, for instance, good system and bad people, what do you think the result is, kind of up in that corner, versus good system, good people, bad system, bad people, kind of those four? Take a second real quick and just jot down in there, when those things are occurring, what you think that's going to look like. Feel free to keep filling those out. I want to just real quick, Jeff found this really cool illustration that I like. I hadn't heard of it before, but it's in regards to the nation of Japan. After World War II, Japan had a lot of their economics was kind of in shambles. And they saw a place for expansion and to find progression again in the auto industry. What can we do to break into the auto industry? The problem was at the time that Japan's cars were a joke. They would break down. There was terrible problems with them. And so they brought in a guy by the name of Edward Deming, and to kind of consult to figure out why this system wasn't working. And he came in under an assumption, and mainly because the Japanese leaders themselves had this assumption, that the issue was that the people weren't motivated, they weren't quality workers, they didn't have good people. It's on that graph piece we're talking about there about bad people, and that was the issue. And he took time to study through it, almost a 10-year period, and his results were surprising to everyone in that it wasn't the people. The people were motivated. They wanted to create quality product. What was going on is the system, the structures, how they created processes was not well done. No one ever taught the Japanese in this type of an industry how that you can do that and how they'd make that helpful. And so when they started to implement it, they had so much success that, well, you guys kind of know what the state of, Japanese cars are nothing now, certainly, whether they're your favorite or not. He's actually so well remembered for the work he did that they actually have a day in Japan called Deming Day that celebrates what he did to help them. That's how big of an impact inputting these systems had on that culture. And so I want to just kind of throw that little bit of an anecdote out there as a point of reference. And then I want to give you guys an opportunity and just to kind of, let's look at each of these four real quick. And what do you think would be in there? I think sort of the bottom left and the top right are a little bit more of the obvious ones. So we'll start a little bit there. What do you guys think with a bad system and bad people, what the outcome looks like? Failure, chaos. Yeah, exactly. What we actually have written here is simply this: out of business, right? It's just if you have bad people and bad processes, that's pretty universally the result. Unless there's some external circumstances propping you up, there's just not going to be success. Now I want to jump up to the top right. Good people, good processes, or good systems as well, just because that one also seems a little obvious. Then we'll look at the other two. What do you guys think the result is when you have good people and good processes going for you? Success. We actually wrote in here maximized results, right? Because it's not necessarily that if you're lacking one of those, you can't still have some level of success, but your results are maximized when you're good with both. Good? We're good? Okay. I'm just making sure my fly's not open or anything. I don't want to pull a Robert. Anyway, how about with bad people but a good system? A drug cartel. I love that answer. Which actually, when it's, you know what, there's going to be some irony when I read off what the answer is actually here. It's kind of surprising. This is what the Japanese thought they had, but they didn't have. And so when you have a good system but bad people, the result we actually have in here is better than average results. We don't think about that. Obviously, there's a point at which your people utterly fail. It's gonna be fatal. But honestly, even if you don't have the best people, with a good system, you are able to oftentimes have better than average results, which I realize kind of goes against that mantra of like, we're only as good as our weakest link, we're only as good as our people. And there's truth to that within a process, within a system, but when you have a larger scale there, you can actually have some great results, even with the below average individual. Absolutely. And I didn't make this, but I would also argue that this is also true more of management than leadership, and more than sustainability or current process than growth. Because I think people become more critical in the idea of growth than they do in, if you think about people who just aren't doing as much, who just get to do the bare minimum. If you have those people in place and you've done this in the past, you've got a good system, you can consistently sustain what you're doing. But to see growth, to see that pushing forward, to not get left behind, that's where people become super critical. And so the final one there is a bad system, but with good people. What's the result for a team, a company? That is the exact word, frustration. That is exactly right. That's what we have down here is frustration. So I'm going to invite Jeff back up, and he'll take it from here.